Okay, thank you. So I am talking about Japanese, but I am hoping that there's going to be stuff that's relevant to other people I kind of see my work in conversation with a lot of your stuff. So the paper has an ambitious title for a 20-minute presentation. So let me explain. There's a relationship, the relationship between gender and script in Japanese writing has a really powerful presence in both emic and etic linguistic ideologies. And this is the kind of quote regarding this issue. We have Sei Shonagon and Murasaki Shikibu, and these are two aristocratic literary women writing at court around the year 1000. So we've got Murasaki Shikibu throwing shade at Shonagon. And it's really famous, okay? So she calls her dreadfully conceited. She thought herself so clever and littered her writings with Chinese characters. But if you examine them closely, they left quite a lot to be desired. And so this is usually interpreted as evidence of a general distaste for women using Chinese characters. And the way that quote tends to be used is to illustrate this view of the Japanese writing system. So Japanese has hiragana, which is, and my terminology is incredibly loose here. Hiragana is a phonemic syllabary, let's call it, and kanji have both semantic meaning and phonological information. And I'm slightly setting aside other things, the katakana for the moment. So these two scripts can be interchangeable, which means that users choose whether to express their meaning through hiragana or kanji. Now, the myth is that hiragana came into being either for or by women in relation to their exclusion from kanji literacy, and this gendered usages persisted right up to the modern period. And this idea is given credence by some linguists, with two prominent voices both in agreement, although their primary interest is in speech and not writing. Both here are discussing the 11th century, which I'm going to call the classical period. If you're interested, it's the 8th to the 12th century. And both move forward into the early modern period, which I'm going to call the Edo period, and that's the 17th to the 19th century. And I don't want to deny the association between gender and script. So starting with philology, we can see that in the classical period, hiragana could be called onnade, and kanji could be called otokode, and these translate as the woman's hand and the man's hand. In the Edo period, we see slightly different terms being used, onnamoji and otokomoji, which means woman's words and man's words. There's this powerful connection between gender and script. It is incontrovertible, it's present from an early date, and it persists for a very long time. So the first thing I'm going to do is problematize this binary of women using hiragana and men using kanji. And I'm going to be using Edo period sources for this presentation, which are much more extensive than classical material, and my readings are informed by earlier discourses. And I'm going to put my argument into a diachronic perspective at the end. So let's compare these Edo period texts. And I'm going to look at the right-hand one first. And this is a manual aimed at men, published in 1711. And this is in what can be called classical Chinese. And I say it can be called classical Chinese because this is a text that should be perfectly readable to a Chinese person, but this is also a writing system that was in use in Japan between Japanese readers. And for that reason, I'm calling it kanbun. So if we zoom in and have a bit of a look at this kanbun, these little katakana annotations around the kanji, these are decoding marks for Japanese readers to help them convert the written grammar and word order into Japanese speech. And just to give you a sense of how this might work in practice, these two characters are the verb to know, shiru, and the negative affix. And the negative in kanbun comes as a prefix, whereas in Japanese speech, the negative comes in the post position. So this annotation on the left tells us to reverse the word order. So negative shiru gives us shirazu. And this one on the right, katakana ru, is an instruction to conjugate the verb in a certain way. So we don't want shirazu, we want shirazaru. So these kind of operations turn written kanbun into vocalizable Japanese. So if we look at the page on the left, this is a manual on letter writing for women. There's a sample letter on the lower part of the page, and this is dominated by hiragana, but it also uses a few kanji, which I have highlighted for you. And the upper register is a metalinguistic discussion, which has a lot of kanji, which I've also highlighted. So these two registers on the page behave in different ways in relation to kanji. And this was published in 1690 by an author who has been interpreted as being concerned with femininity. So if we zoom in on part of this letter and look more closely, we can see this kanji in pink. There. It's given reading in hiragana in green. So usually this kanji is mochi, but we're given an archaic orthography and pronunciation, mochi. But we also see these hana, these hiragana in green are given their kanji in pink. So these two scripts, kanji and kana, gloss each other in both directions. So in other words, the non-use of kanji is a convention that has to be learned, and its absence seems to make a text more difficult to interpret, so the author gives the reader a hand. So this is suggesting that kana literacy and kanji literacy are more entangled than is generally recognized. But I'm going to turn to the back of this letter manual. On the right is the last letter in the book and the metalinguistic discussion above, but on the left is a full page of kanji. And the heading is list of women's words. And this page is followed by full 6 further pages, which look just like this. So let me draw your attention to these two kanji pairs on this list. The kanji are given hiragana to indicate the way they should be voiced. And there are 2 different kanji with the same reading, but different meanings. And there is no disambiguation other than the reading. We also have this reversed word order, which is something we've already seen in male kanbun. And the negative particle is above instead of below. We have the same annotation to remind us to reverse them. And this is from an author who is writing for a readership of women of, let's say, low to middling class in a book where she is ostensibly concerned with femininity. So, and there are no explanatory notes. So this flies in the face of the received understanding of women's use of kanji. What we are not seeing is any exclusion from kanji literacy, but the opposite. This author has an expectation of her readers coming to her book with kanji literacy. And furthermore, the expectation is of the kind of literacy that appertains to the apparently exclusively male domain of kanbun. So this gender dichotomy of kana kanji usage doesn't show up quite as clearly as we might have expected. Women and men are labels that don't explain anything that we see in the primary sources. As we've just seen, women are using kanji, and obviously there's no doubt about whether men are using kana. So I'm going to remove these. And I'm going to dig a bit deeper into this question of kana and kanji. And I'm going to give these 2 sides of the slide their proper names, which is wa and kan. These are the Japanese terms. Now, wa and kan are part of the conceptual map of Japanese culture, in art, in literature, and in intellectual thought. And although we can label wa and kan Japanese and Chinese, it is absolutely crucial to understand that Han does not mean China, the state, the geographical place, Chinese people. So I'm leaving these labels here for clarity, but I'm graying them out because we have to use these terms at arm's length, because kan does not mean other, set against a Japan that is not other. What wa and kan actually mean is something like this. This is a complementary relationship, a dialectic. Private exists because there is such a thing as public. Public exists because there is such a thing as private. So together, wa and kan structure Japanese self-understanding, and in particular, they structure Japanese writing. And this slightly leads into some of the things that Amalie mentioned. We can add in some more specific qualitative ideas here. This is drawing on art historical research, but I'm going to add in the point of affect, which I find critical in the context of grapholinguistics, Japanese grapholinguistics. So what this means in terms of writing is something like this. We have already talked about kana and kanji, and I have mentioned kanbun. And kanbun's equivalent on the wa side is wabun. And we also have wa and kan lexical terms, which are sometimes called native and Chinese derived. And the different ways of vocalizing the same character also fit into this wa and kan way of thinking. And this is not a typology. What I want to say is there are many more types of writing than just two. And these are some of the others. This is not an inventory. It's not a typology. This is a heuristic. I want to illustrate that there are many, many different varieties of Japanese writing. Each has its own conventions and variable proportions of kana and kanji, and each can be placed somewhere on a continuum between wa and kan, and I've represented this spatially. So on the right-hand side, on the far right, we have kanbun. That's the only one that would be intelligible to Chinese people. And as we come towards the left, we have variations of kanbun which aren't going to be intelligible to Chinese people. And if we look at the left, I haven't got the same range of terms on this side, but the one I've circled could be called kanabun, because this is aimed at those with a bare bones kind of literacy, and it only uses kana. But there's a kanji. I mean, it's a simple kanji, but this kind of hints at where I'm going next, because what I want to do now is problematize the dichotomy of hiragana and kanji, because the bare bones literacy that only uses syllabic kana does use kanji. They are simple ones, but they are treated as being all in the same bucket of simple graphemes. So in some sense, I think there's a suggestion of a non-separation of kana and kanji. But I want to explore that point a bit more by looking at what I consider hiragana really were in pre-modern writing, because it's something that I think is very different from what they are today. Kana are essentially highly cursive variants of a parent kanji. And here we've got three of the most common allographs for ha. In yellow is the modern typographic ha at the top, and I've circled the cursive rendering that it's closest to. And in pink hexagons, there are the parent kanji for the three allographs, and below each in green, that's a series of different cursive renderings. And the modern hiragana ha comes from the parent kanji nami or ha, which means wave. And these cursive instantiations are arranged with the least cursive at the top and the most cursive at the bottom. Or, stated another way, they are arranged with the parent kanji more clearly expressed at the top and more highly abbreviated at the bottom. And what that means is each time a writer inscribes kana, they make a decision about how cursively to write it in any single instantiation. And this is an analog sliding scale. But what it also means is that the parent kanji is always hovering behind the kana, whether we look for it or not, whether we see it on the page or not. What I want to suggest by this is that kana literacy fundamentally involved kanji literacy, even if that's not what we see on the page. And we can more closely examine the status of kana using this page from a book that was published in 1733 for a female readership. And we can see we have a mixture of kana and kanji on this page, but it might not be immediately clear which is which. So to modern readers, let's focus on these three characters. This is a sentence fragment, and it would be read ne no hino, but in this inscription, one of the no particles omitted, but it's still implied. And in transcription, it's going to, transcription according to modern conventions is going to look like this. So we have kanji, kanji, kana. However, when we look at the page itself, things are quite a lot less clear because these are actually all kana. These are the parent kanji, some kind of cursive variations to prove it. This is taken from a kana dictionary, which we use in paleography. So we should think of it like this. Or should we actually think of it like that? Because they're all also kanji. And this is taken from a kanji dictionary, which we use in paleography. What's particularly striking about this page is that the third graph no is inscribed with very little cursivity. So kana are usually more cursive, kanji are usually less cursive, but here the grapheme has a very kanji-like character, but it operates as kana. So perhaps we could think of it like this. What I'm trying to suggest is there's a porous boundary between kana and kanji. So we haven't got the man-woman thing. We haven't got the clean distinction between hiragana and kanji that we thought we had, but we do still have to explain these terms. When we see the terms onnade and otokode in the classical period, they don't refer to hiragana and kanji. Otokode could also refer to archaic kana, which are called manyogana, which linguistically functioned like kana, but looked like kanji, a bit like the very uncursive no that we just saw. So manyogana were basically kanji used for their phonemic values in a writing system that did not yet differentiate between phonemic graphemes and semantic graphemes. And the distinction became marked by cursivity around the 9th century. And it's this which is onnade. Otokode is a non-cursive mode of inscription, and onnade is a cursive mode of inscription. So the hand means the hand, not the grapheme. When we move forward into the Edo period, we're no longer talking about hands, but moji. And I think it's safe to say that these terms we can take as more directly referring to the graphemes, but with the proviso that, as we've seen, there's not this stark difference between kana and kanji that we have been led to expect. So I'm going to talk about cursivity because I want to argue that cursivity was a key part of how pre-modern writing operated. These are different ways of inscribing the grapheme go, which is an honorific particle which precedes a noun, again from a manual for women. And notice that this is only represented as kanji, with the non-cursive inscription used for highly formal address to a superior, and a highly cursive, highly abbreviated variation used to address one's inferiors. And this too is part of the Wakan dialectic. So if we fit this all together, cursivity is an axis which expresses wa and kan relations along a spectrum of possibilities. Cursivity, hiragana, kanji, even katakana, they all exist within this wakan space. And now I'm going to drop in these gender terms. And here I've used the possessives because I want to be clear that this is gender as a part of the wakan schema. So we can think about women's and men's as referring to contexts of writing. Women's letters were a particular type of letter that was highly intimate, highly affective. Men's letters were more formal, less personal kind of letter. So the social categories, man and woman, are external to this schematic and they interact with it. So just thinking about letters, a woman inviting another woman to view cherry blossoms together will be writing over here somewhere. A man writing a love letter to a woman is also writing over here, probably a little bit adjusted to the right. A woman writing to another woman saying, I'm sending you 3 bolts of cloth and my husband had a promotion, she's probably writing over here. And a man writing to a female relative, he might write more over here. This structure, wakan, enables us to ask new questions or interesting questions. So for example, male-male love was highly celebrated in the Edo period. This picture is from a book arguing that male-male love is superior to heterosexual love. So how does a man write a love letter to a man? I actually can't answer that question, and I'm genuinely interested. Similarly, in the Edo period again, this is when the tradition of male actors specializing in female roles started, and these actors practiced femininity offstage as well as on stage. What their letters look like, also another open question. So if we want to know about gender in pre-modern Japan, writing is an excellent way of going about it. And that's not to mention all the other open questions, which kind of interest me more at this moment. This generates questions that don't relate to gender. And you can ask me if you want to know. So about that 1,000 years, we've got Murasaki Shikibu throwing shade at Sei Shonagon. If we take Shikibu's advice and examine the words closely, she is speaking from a position of kan literacy, which she seems to imply surpasses Shonagon's, at least stylistically. And incidentally, she doesn't use the term kanji, but mana. So this could absolutely be explored as a question of stylistics. So what this is a disagreement about the use of kan modes in a court that was divided between competing sources of political legitimacy, one wa and one kan. And Shonagon is in the other camp. So Shikibu is taking a rhetorical position. She's not making an absolute statement about women using kanji. The ways in which wa and kan are enacted on any given page is through the endless combination and recombination of linguistic and inscription choices. Wakan is an indexical field, a constellation of ideologically related meanings, any one of which can be activated in the situated use of the variable. Variable. I think we have to think about what we consider the variables in our writing systems. Wakan could be used to point to any number of things, including, but not limited to, gender. And Wakan was not static, not unified, and not easily mappable. But what I can say with certainty is that gender in pre-modern Japanese writing was far more complex, and dare I say far more interesting, than mere kana versus kanji, men versus women. And the projection of these simplistic categories obscures the rich indexicality that Wakan embeds within the Japanese writing system. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this extremely beautiful expose and images. Questions?
So thank you for that. It's always very. You have shown us all these slides between 18 and you said it wasn't a classification, but still we had all these intermediate versions which should show some kind of non-binarity. So my question is the Japanese, the digitalization, standardization on the computer between clear kanas and clear kanjis a threat to non-binarity in Japanese society?
I think it, do you mean like socially, like in terms of gender, or do you mean in terms of writing?
Both.
I think this has largely been lost because we have projected the linguistic categories of modern kanji and kana onto the past, where I don't think they exist in the same way. And I do think that has some profound effects, but whether those effects are social or not, I would hesitate to. I could speculate that with this model, social binaries might be less instinctive in some way, in the sense that I have a intuition that writing affects us and how we perceive the world.
Yes, but in school you learn something which is clearly kana and clearly kanji.
Yes,
So isn't that influencing you in the rest of your life?
I believe so. I would say so. And that's why I think this is really interesting, really important. So yes, I would agree. Lawrence?
Have you attempted to represent these variations digitally in terms of how do you record these other than photographing, annotating those photographs?
Okay, so big picture, I feel that a computer system doesn't have the capacity to deal with this writing system in an acceptable way. And so I've spent quite a lot of time problematizing a text regime. My terminology, I consider text to be quite different from writing. And this stuff is writing, and a computer produces text, and these are different things. And text is too small for all of the things that are in Japanese writing. And that's why I'm interested in the variables in the indexical field. When we're interpreting this stuff, we're only looking at one set of variables and not a whole lot of other things like cursivity. So we don't have systems that are set up for this in any way. Any solution would be, I mean, I'd love it. Comp sci people.
Writing practice is rather, let's say a private kind of a scenario or maybe etc. I was just wondering, what have this spectrum like change if it's the text moving to the printing scenario? Because in my knowledge, like there's publications were produced by Woodblock in kanji and also Sagabon in kana. So how does it change? I was wondering if you had any notions for this.
Okay, so I've previously made the argument that movable type became available in Japan like late 16th century, and they played around for it for about 50 years. They're publishing with movable type Sagabon, and then they move away from it. And my argument is that they move away from it because it's not as good as woodblock print. From a Japanese studies perspective, we get asked why they're not using movable type, but our question is, why are you guys using movable type? It's crap. And so there is a look, they moved to movable type later, 1900, say. So these are all print. Everything that I've showed you is books that were printed using the block print technology in the Edo period.
Oh, that's like publicize the text in some sense. Also, I'm just curious that if this probably can change.
Oh, did the Sagabon change writing? We should talk about, let's talk about Sagabon.
Thank you, that was truly fascinating. I'm wondering about the relationship between the cursivity and the ligatory.
Yeah. Okay, this is a massive problem for me with Unicode because this on the WA side, you have more ligatures as well. Cursivity and ligatures, for me, is kind of the same bucket, but there are certain conventions of ligatures which I'm treating as words, but I can't, they're not words in like the world now. And the connection between ligatures are really important. So like there's instructions in the back of this book actually about where not to break your characters and where you should break your what you can join and what you can't join. And that's grammatical, and it's also not obvious to her learners. And the ligatures, they vary through time. So sometimes you only might join 1 or 2 or 3 characters. And at this time, there are some styles which join like everything on 2 lines and stuff. And it's really flamboyant, incredibly difficult. But the ligatures are incredibly difficult to do. It takes a huge amount of training, brush training.
Last question.
This is so great. I'm wondering, the distinction between public and private is, I would say, a false binary, especially today. And I'm wondering how you're dealing with that dichotomy that is like useful, like what you were saying about like we have a dialectic because then we can think about these opposites. But one of the things I've been finding talking with my students of late is like my antiquated idea of privacy now
Oh, yes.
seems related to them.
Yeah.
And so like I'm wondering how you're thinking about like how that's working through this corpus or through
Yeah.
your work more generally.
Yeah. So public and private have a very specific meaning in Japanese culture.
Sure.
And it's still visible in things like architecture. When you go into someone's home, you take your shoes off. So there's the family and outside of the family, or there's our company and other companies. So it's very embedded in fundamental in Japanese culture still. And that's what we're seeing. So the labels that I've used here are just sort of like convenient. And it's a very different idea of like in and out, public and private. It's not the same kind of thing as we're dealing with. It's analogous.